lunch, there's a panel discussion, which I'm sure you've seen in the agenda. So what we thought we would do during lunch is facilitate some discussions at each individual table and talk about a couple of your biggest challenges that you've faced on projects and keeping them moving forward, so that we've got some way to facilitate discussion amongst the panelists.
So I'll kind of answer both questions at the same time, but at our table we had a contractor, an engineer, and a vendor. One of the major themes that they felt there was just kind of a lack of trust and an adversarial relationship between the contractor and the engineer.
We talk about the requirement, then we jump right to contract award and contractor execution, but if the procurement process isn't good and hasn't been well thought through, you're going to hit a brick wall.
Funding. There's so many great things we want to do, there's so many great projects. If there's just more money in the world, we could get all this great stuff done.
One of the issues that two of us had was on safety during construction. If you're doing a design build, does that detract some from your leverage with safety and the contractor?
Okay, we will touch on that. Thank you. So I just want to start off with a little bit of background about who's sitting up here and kind of why. So when we were talking about doing this with GLOW and having sort of a panel discussion, because I don't think it's ever good just to hear from one person. It's good to get multiple perspectives. We thought, well, shoot, I mean, R&M and Turnagain and HDR, we have a lot of local folks, and that list is much longer, that could get up here and present their opinions and their experiences and all of that about alternative delivery, and that probably would be very effective. However, I think sometimes that could be perceived potentially in a negative way, because someone might think that somebody has a commercial interest in sitting up here, they're trying to promote their business or their company, and so we really, in talking with GLOW, decided, like, would it be okay to bring in some people from down south, from folks that don't have a vested interest here? These guys aren't going to be trying to necessarily do business in this market. They're not trying to sell anything. And what's really cool to me is that all of them have come here at their own will. None of them are being paid. None of them are members of this association. They just love to talk about this because they're all really passionate about it. It's kind of like if we go back to my firearm example, right? Like if your friend, if your buddy was using a .44 to be moose hunting, you would probably want to tell him there's a better tool for the job. So that's kind of what we thought this would allow for. And just as a brief introduction to who's up here, I know you have their bios, you've probably read, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves as well, but just sort of why, when I reached out to these, why these guys? So first of all, we have Darren here, Darren Sweeney, a project manager for the city of Richland, Washington. And I knew if we brought somebody from the heart of Seattle, you may not connect as well. And so what's cool about Richland is he's truly a small town guy. I mean, Richland is kind of a medium-sized town, 50,000, so bigger than, our Alaska towns. But he definitely has lived in smaller towns. He has that, he gets small town and he gets the remote nature. So he's also an owner. He's a harbor master, but for his type of projects, right? So I think it's helpful to have an owner's perspective that has done this kind of work, but also he's intimately involved in the Design Build Institute of America, so he also understands the best practices that they have been able to establish and been involved in a lot of those conferences. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Then we have Mark Keller, who you got to see when he presented on HUNA, and kind of gave some background on himself there as well. But Mark and I have worked together for a long time, and I feel like if it has been done, Mark has done it. So he really has a lot of different experiences that are quite broad, from small projects to mega projects in the Bs, the billions. You can certainly have lessons learned from those projects. And then we have Jim Bauman, and Jim is a PE, so he's our engineer representation up here. Jim and I worked together right when I got out of college, so I've known Jim a very long time, and I wholeheartedly consider him one of my best and favorite mentors. He used to work for CH2M Hill, and that's where we met. He now works for Kiewit. So he's actually an engineer that's employed by a contractor, and he has dedicated, the last 15 years of his career to design build. And so he certainly offers a different perspective than maybe some other folks that are up here. He hasn't done one or two design build jobs. He's actually done a lot. So then we have Tim Hutton, who is here with us from Garco Construction, and that is a contractor in Spokane, Washington. Again, a little bit smaller town than, let's say, Seattle or whatnot. But Tim has done construction projects for the last 30 years in a variety of states, and has seen a lot of low bid work. He is the project manager on site, dealing not only with the contract and his crews, handling the change orders, et cetera, but also dealing with RFIs and engineers, and knows that perspective. He's also worked on several alternative delivery projects, including CMGC and design build, and he's currently pursuing a progressive design build project. So just sort of a different perspective. So we basically have owner's rep, who Mark also has been in the planning side of things, and I think that's a perfect element to highlight here as well. Jim, our engineer, and Tim, our contractor. So, all right, enough of that. I think I'd like to start by just kind of asking each of you here, when did you have that aha moment that design build might be, or GCCM might be a good option to consider? I mean, when were you really sold on, yeah, this makes sense? I'm going to start with you, Darren, and then you can just pass it on.
All right. So thank you very much for having me up here. So yeah, I came from the contracting side of the world. So I was a general contractor for years in Idaho. So I say I'm from Richland with 50,000 people. I'm actually from Rigby, Idaho, which has about 2,000. So that's a little more my style. So I got hired onto the city of Richland in 2013, and I was on the operations side. So I was on the facilities maintenance side. So I took care of 63 parks. I say we have some marinas on the Columbia River, but that's kind of an insult to you guys that actually have real marinas. We have a little bit of, we have about 500,000 square feet of public facilities that we take care of. And I was on the maintenance and operations side. In 2014, I caught wind that the City of Richland Fire Department was working in connection with the city of Kennewick, which is our sister city. It's called the Tri-Cities. They should all just be one, but there's a lot of pride going on there. But Richland and Kennewick were designing a prototype fire station, and they were sitting down together with an architect out of Seattle, and they were designing this station that could be the prototype that they could go into the future and say, all right, this is how we're going to build it, and they thought that they could get some economy of scales. The problem is that the city manager had committed to the public that this fire station will cost $3.5 million and not a penny more. That was her quote. So she is on record saying this will cost $3.5 million and not a penny more. And that came from a highly technical estimate from the fire chief, who handed her a piece of paper one day. But it was out there, it was on record. So they were designing this fire station with an architect. So it was pure design, bid, build mentality. And the architect would come back with the engineer, and their estimates were in that $4.8 to $5 million range. And this had been going on for 8 years. They'd been going and hit and miss, going back trying to get this fire station built. And they could not get the price to work. They would estimate it, they would design it, no one would control the process. So I got in and I said, can I make a suggestion that maybe we go with design build? And not just design build, but we go progressive design build, because I know we can make this work. And here I was on the operations side, new employee at an organization, and I suggest that we go a whole different way in our organization than what we had done for years. And I got to tell you, there were a lot of people running for the hills. Well, the city manager, luckily enough, was desperate. And she said, all right, you think you can do it? And I said, yeah, I think I can do it. And so she gave me the green light and said, go for it. Let's see what this can do. So I was very alone in the process. And I feel a lot of your pain from the operations side. You come into an organization, there's a bureaucracy, and there's people that make decisions, and you're suggesting a completely different way to do business, and you get a lot of people that look at you like, I'm not getting on that train. Well, I'll tell you how it went down. So we said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go design build, and we put out our RFP, and we did a very qualifications-based RFP. We had a lot of programming in place already based on the previous work, but the first thing I told the contractors was get rid of a lot of these specs that we put out there because obviously they don't work within the price. So I'm looking for innovation. I'm looking for a team that has worked together, and we can spend $3.5 million and not a penny more, and no is a good answer. So we put the RFP out. We got some really qualified contractors that came in. At the same time, Kennewick, our sister city, went design, bid, build with their project. So they went full on traditional. They said, Richland's going design, build. I don't want anything to do with them. They're idiots. We're going to do it our way because we know better than them. So they started the design, bid, build process at the exact same time that we started the design, bid, build process. So little did I know when we started this that this was the first progressive design build ever done in the state of Washington for a public municipality. I had no idea. Didn't have any clue. And it was the first design build done under $10 million in the state of Washington for a public municipality. So there was a ton of interest in this project. And we went forward and we started. We got the RFP out in May, and we opened our fire station 1 year later. From RFP to completion in 1 year. And I was able to go back to the city council because I have on record that city council was telling me that there was no way I could make it work. I made one of those big golf checks. You guys seen those ones that they hand out? I made a huge one for $125,000 that we saved on the project. Because what we did is we designed to budget. And that's a different way of looking at it. So before they were designing then budgeting. Well, we came in and we said $3.5 million. What can we get for that? What will fulfill our business needs? And we did it. Now, Kennewick did design, bid, build. They opened their doors on a new fire station a year after us and spending $850,000 more than what we did to go and design, build. Anyway, so that was a real aha moment for me. Not that design, build works because I had done it before, but that it really works in municipalities. And it was an aha moment that you can change from an owner side. You can change the perception of your organization. You can change the bureaucracy. We just broke ground 2 days ago on our new city hall, which is an $18.5 million new city hall right in the center of Richland. And we're also doing that as a progressive design build as well. And the organization is full behind this one. So that was my aha moment.
Aha moments. I think the biggest one for me relative to design build, we were in the middle of widening the I-5 corridor through Everett. We did 14 lane miles we added, and we built or widened 23 bridges. And we were doing a pretty successful job. It was CH, 2M Hill, Atkinson joint venture. CH had 30% of the construction side of things plus all the design work. And in the middle of doing that project, which is about $328 million total project, WashDOT came along because the city of Everett had pushed them pretty hard about wanting what's called a SPUI, a single point urban interchange, going over I-5. And they wanted to drop that in the middle of our design build project. And we were able to take people off of the design build team, put them onto the design for the SPUI, take contractors, people, the supers that we had, and move some of those over to that and make it happen. We got a $38 million change order from WashDOT, which is the biggest change order WashDOT had ever written. And we were able to complete the original project on time as well as the SPUI. And that suggests to me that not only is a design build a good way to deliver, it's a good way to be flexible to meet the owner's needs. There were some questions earlier about things change, management changes, the communication needs to change, leadership changes. And design build can be flexible enough to adapt to that. Now, obviously, that requires a great working relationship between the owner, who is key to the success of a design build, in my opinion. If a new funding source comes along that you can add into it, a new need comes along, if you've got a change in a regulatory condition, then you can incorporate that fairly easily and you can negotiate a really solid working relationship, especially if you've built a basis of trust with your contractor, with your design build team. And it's in my opinion, and that's really what we learned there in Everett, it was a three-way proposition. WashDOT came up with a need to build a SPUI. Okay, the design build team came up with a team to design it, a team to construct it, and we were able to do that within the context of the original project. And to me, that speaks a great deal to the successes of design build for a lot of projects. And I know I've talked about bigger projects and bigger dollar values on projects than typically you get to see up here in Alaska. But I think you can sequence and arrange design build projects for smaller scale projects as well as for $2 billion projects building a DRAM plant for Samsung in Austin, Texas in 19 months. It can be done. And it's a question of scale and what you have on the leadership side of your design build team as well as the leadership side of the owner. So that was my aha moment. Jim?
So I'm the engineer, and I really identify myself as a problem solver. I like to understand what community and owners' issues are and come up with a solution that works. The early 2000s, I started doing design build, and I just love it because it's full satisfaction of conceptualizing, working through the solutions, seeing it built very quickly. And you're on the job until it's done. And that I find extremely satisfying. One project in particular that's really stood out in my career was for Washington DOT. They had a $125 million budget to widen I-405 in Renton, and we came up with some good solutions, and we were able to reconfigure an interchange, turn a bridge from 8 spans into a 3-span bridge, eliminate 75-foot tall retaining walls. And we reduced the cost by $39 million in our original bid. And you think, gosh, is the owner gonna like this? And in the first meetings, they said, yes, this is the project that solves our problems, and it gives us enough money we can go build another project. And then through the life of that job, which you're on site about a year and a half doing the design work, we ran into issues. We were sending a video camera up a storm drain pipe, checking the condition of it, if it was adequate to expand the pipe. And lo and behold, this 18-inch storm drain opens up into this cavern almost as wide as this room, and it's a coal mine. Under the freeway is a coal mine, and we have to widen over this coal mine additionally. And we're like, what the heck do we do? So we get together. This is during the contract phase, post-award. We're already started construction. We've got about a 2-week window before this is really going to start impacting the schedule of things. And so next day we get everybody together. The owner brings in geotechnical engineers, their experts. We got our experts there, the contractor there, and we said, okay, how do we attack this issue? What do we need to do? We need more information. Okay, let's go schedule that this week. Next week we're going to narrow down the options, and in 2 weeks we got to have a clear plan, or it's going to delay the critical path. We got through that issue. Everybody agreed with the solution. 2 weeks was not a problem. In the end, that job, I heard from several of the owner's representatives that in their entire careers, that project stood out the most because we had a trusting environment with everybody on site making decisions together. So I bit the design build bullet 15 years ago, and I haven't been able to let go. I just love it.
So I really didn't have an aha moment, but I can say that I've had several aha moments. Part of my career has spanned over the course of 9 states, from Texas up to Alaska, a couple jobs here in Alaska. And I think one of the things that comes to mind with most of my experience being bid build is the lack of time to initiate and follow through with VE solutions. So in working in 9 different states, you see a vast difference between design techniques to build almost the same thing. Most of my career has been spent building bridges. Well, people think most bridges are the same, but each state has their own DOT, has their own consultant design engineers, and they seem to approach things with great difference. And you can bring that to the next project. And oftentimes we're not afforded the time due to the contract constraints to actually implement those ideas, which could be quite a bit of money in savings and time, and increased scalability or secondary costs, things like that. So I think the thing that's aha moment is every project.
We all know it's a shift in mindset, right? Design build is vastly different than design bid build, from the way you think about the job, from the way you approach it, everything. So how have you guys gone about addressing some of those issues with the mindset of people you're dealing with? I mean, how do you get your team on board and address that? So I'll start with Darren, and then we'll, if you want to hand it back, we'll go to somebody else too.
So that was one of the challenges of the project. And what I found is the reason that we hate, and I say we as owners and our organizations hate a change in mindset, is because it's different. And we fear what we don't know. And so what I did is I sent out an email, sent out some information on design build, but then I started to look at really who this was going to affect. Who is it really going to affect? It was going to affect the city manager. It was going to affect my finance department, my procurement people. And so what I did is I scheduled meetings with them and sat down and just explained the process. And it was really that simple. I just explained how we can make this work. I explained why it was going to be better, especially when we started talking about the liability gap. And when you start getting with your legal team and you start talking about Spearn doctrine and closing that liability gap, they're going to love you. I promise. They really enjoy that. And then what we did, because one of the biggest fears that our organization had was, well, we don't have contracts that deal with design build. That's a little bit out of what we typically do. Well, the DBIA, the Design Build Institute of America, has contracts, has great forms, and we gave it to our legal team, and they reviewed them and went, wow, these are fantastic. And we used the DBIA contracts. And then I kept them informed throughout the process. I involved them on the team. I had them come in and listen to the meetings. I had them come in and sit at that same table as the architect and engineer and my maintenance staff and the fire chief and the subcontractors as we tried to solve problems around the table. And they got to actually experience the collaboration and teamwork firsthand. And in that, we would, this is kind of it was pre-planned on my part, but when I brought procurement, for example, into the room when we were having those discussions, I would have them ask questions to the procurement person to involve them. We had some pre-planned questions that someone on the team would ask, and they thought, wow, this is great. They're really involving me as well. And like I said, the first time I did it, I was a little bit out on an island. The next time that we did it, I had people from each of those departments that were interested in design build request to be on the city hall team, request to be part of that teamwork and that collaboration. And I had to do the same with city council. I had to do the same with the city manager, which is to sit down and educate and teach, but then quite honestly is prove it. There's no better way to do it than to get out there and do it properly, put in the time as the owner, get it done right, and then come back and share the success with the rest of the team. And it's moving forward. I mean, we have shifted not just, so the mental shift to this teamwork and collaboration has not just been in our construction projects, but the design build mentality has actually shifted into our parks and recreation department. And I'm sitting with them right now working on how they can collaborate on their event management and how they can collaborate and bring all the parties together around a table when we put on a concert on our stage. And all those principles that we're learning from design build should permeate through the organization, because those principles of teamwork, collaboration, bringing the experts in, assigning risk to those people that can actually handle the risk the best, all those are universal principles. Why we lost it in construction years ago and why we've gone to an adversarial relationship, I don't understand. But from an organization standpoint, design build should be more than just your construction projects. It should be a mindset through the organization.
To maybe pass to Jim, or if you could use Tim's mic there. Sorry, can I take this?
Yeah.
So I'm going to direct this question at Jim as well, the exact same one, and here's why. So I've been in a lot of meetings with Jim, trying to come up with design solutions. And we've had subcontractors in the room and engineers and geotechs and structural engineers. And I can tell you as a contractor in that role, there were times I was really frustrated. I was like, these engineers at the table don't get it. And you know what I mean? You've witnessed my frustration. And, but I respected them. I knew that their positions were valid. And I've always said, you know, you can sometimes ask 15 engineers the same question and you'll get 15 different answers. It's the same for contractors too. We all approach things differently. But Jim, as a design manager, how have you handled your staff and the sort of the engineering mentality that has to shift in design build? Does that make sense?
Sure, I can speak to that. Your question's definitely true of geotechs. If you ask 10 geotechs, you'll get 12 different answers. There's some engineers that get design build, but certainly not all of them. I mean, my experience working with large engineering groups is that really the ones that get that mentality are probably 20% of the industry that really have the capacity, and it's thinking outside their own world. You know, it's being open to other ideas. It's not trying to have the last word, but to be able to throw out options. Engineers, I always say, have multiple options for everything they do, and you really get to the most efficient solution by asking the builder and the owner what they want, because we can go different ways as designers. So don't just, in bid build, you get one design, but in design build, you get multiple solutions directed by the team as a consensus.
Thank you very much. I'm going to switch to a different question, and this one I'm going to ask of Mark, I think, here. So what about quality, Mark? I mean, have you seen in your experience that the quality tanks in design build? How do you prevent that, Mark? How do you make sure you don't get a cheap product that you don't like?
I guess I think there's a couple of ways to look at the answer to that question. And part of it is selecting the right team, the right contractor, and setting your expectations. And you do that before you issue your RFQ or your RFP. You're going to interview with people, you're going to talk to contractors and designers and those kind of folk about what your project is, and you're going to solicit their interest on it. And you're going to let them know what your expectations of quality are. Not that you're going to write, 87 pages of specifications about flat floors or the mill thickness of paint, but you're going to say, this is how I want this project to be done. And if you do that, then you can winnow down the people who are going to be interested in submitting their qualifications. You can winnow down, after you get qualifications, who you want to propose. And personally, I like to get to about 3 teams, 3 proposers. You don't necessarily close the door on somebody who wants to submit, but you say, these are the people that we're really looking at for an interest. And one of the things we haven't talked about here in terms of quality control, and I think it relates real specifically, is as you go through the evaluation process, as you look at the results that come in on your RFP, if you have the time and you can afford people the opportunity, is to let them come in with what I call ATCs, what we call ATCs, alternative technical concepts, different ways to do what you want to accomplish on your job. And let your team come in and tell you how they think they could do this better and differently. And they will be invested in the quality of what they're doing, what they're proposing to you, and they will really be committed to delivering where you want to go, because you've given Jim and you've given Tim, and organizations like that, the opportunity to think through the project and deliver what it is you're really looking for.
I'm going to actually ask the same question of you, Tim. As a contractor, are you out there cutting corners because it's now design build? Is it any different?
I'd even say less so, mainly because the reference aspect of the design, build, and proposals. Typically, when we're proposing for a job, the owner is asking for references, and we need to provide that. When we're doing low bid work, it's meet the spec as quickly and as cheaply as possible every day. So that's about it.
As an owner, when it's a low bid project, I'll meet the subcontractor the day he shows up to start the work. In design build, you know, we just broke ground yesterday. For the past year, I've been working with the mechanical contractor and the electrical contractor and the plumber. Already sitting around the table, we're developing a relationship. They're understanding from me what exactly I'm expecting. And so we have a deeper relationship. And when the relationships deepen, then they're way more vested than just showing up, blowing it out, making their money, and getting gone.
You know, I'll add on a project I'm currently doing. I had the owner of the company I work for come out to the job, and he was sticking his thumb in some of the bug holes in the concrete on the forms we had just stripped. And he's saying, what are we going to do about this? I said, well, it's in spec. And he says, but this is a showcase job. I said, well, it's also a low bid job, and you know, I mean, if we get a change order to change the finish spec for the concrete, maybe we can have an opportunity to make more money on it. So there is a mentality shift sometimes, and when low bid work, we're looking for every inch. So.
Yep, that's good. All right, let's jump into some of the questions you guys had, and then if time still allows, we'll circle back to some more that I have that we prepared in advance of this. So we heard from the audience about post-award changes, and how are those, you know, those have been an issue, you know, whether it's leadership changes or regulations change. I know especially with our marine mammal regulations, it feels like to me those change every 3 months. I mean, what we were using as a standard, you know, 6 months ago, now it's a totally different game. And you're like, wait a second, why do I got to monitor differently now? The guy next door didn't. So those things do change. And so I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, Mark, during your introduction, but could we maybe circle back to that? And I'll go with Jim, actually. You know, how do you handle post-award changes, whether it's regulatory? I mean, there's a variety of changes that could happen.
Okay, I'll hit regulatory first. I'll say most contracts are set up with a clear definition of which regulations they were based on. Usually there's, you know, the prior manual that was published before the RFP date usually is the one that governs. And if there's any updates, those become a change for the contractor, so that you don't have to build that risk into your price. A lot of people think design build is a lump sum fixed price, not much flexibility, but I'd say in practice many jobs end up with change orders. Oftentimes change orders are because, hey, the owner saved so much money, now they want to add some more facilities, and they want to do it in the time frame while you're out there. So oftentimes you can do that very readily. One convenient way to do that is, rather than try and negotiate a lump sum price and have the delays of doing the design and who's paying for that design before we get to the lump sum price kind of thing, is an easy way is to go like a progressive sort of design build approach, where the owner will pay for some design costs to get to a 30% or a 60% level of design where you can really firm up the quantities, and then at that point you can get a nice fixed price. But regulations are something you really got to be strict in what applies at the beginning of the contract to know where the change point is.
That's perfect. Thank you. Does anyone else have something to add?
I guess what I would suggest from my perspective, and I've done it several different ways, working as the contractor, working as the design manager on other things. When you get a change in leadership, change in management, or a regulatory requirement comes along that isn't addressed in your code issues, is you have to have an adult conversation. As you're the project manager, you go in and you talk to the client and you say, look, we've got a $5 million project here, okay? You want to add this, okay? What do you want to take away? Okay, what can we eliminate out of this particular contract that will pay for the change that you want? And you make the client man up and address the issue and say, okay, we're not going to build 4 buildings at Hoonah, we're going to build 3. We're going to eliminate a pavilion, we're going to save $1.7 million that we're going to apply to something else. And owners will do that if you give them the opportunity. It isn't necessarily something that gets to be an adversarial situation right away. You let it be a choice. You let it be part of the discussion that you have on a regular basis. And the way you figure that out as the owner's rep is you go to your designer and you go to your contractor and you say, what could we do differently here? Okay. Do we need to put copper gutters on this building, or can we put a galvanized painted gutter on the building? What's the difference in cost, and how do we apply that to the hood that goes into the restaurant? And it's a real simple set of solutions. You give people options and you let them make decisions. And you don't just throw that back on your design build team and say, oh, I can't do this or I want to do that. You sit there and you collaboratively make decisions and you use the resources of the whole team.
So we had a fire chief in the middle of the fire station. Our fire chief switched. So, I mean, it was a big deal. I mean, it was prime example of what you went through. And that's exactly what we did. We came in with the new fire chief, and the day that he started, I sat down and I said, Tom, here's the deal. We have $3.5 million and not a penny more. You know that. This is what we've planned. This is why we've planned it. This is where we are in the process. This is how much we've committed already. This is what we have to deal with. And he changed a few things. He did come in and make some changes, but what was nice is we had the flexibility with the design build team to swap. So he wanted to increase some sizes in some of the different rooms. I don't need to go into all the specifics, but we were able to increase some room sizes on one side and decrease them on the other side and find savings within the budget, working collaboratively as a team to actually come in under budget and well ahead of schedule. So that's exactly what we need to do. You just need to have an adult conversation, and when you have that trust and that collaboration that you've been working with, you just default to that. It becomes so part of who you are as an organization that any other way of handling it wouldn't make any sense. You bring everyone at the table and you just talk about it.
Exactly. Thank you. So what about this miscommunication? If you have an RFP or a document where we're talking about a vendor, right? They're trying to respond to a request for proposals, and you get this criteria, and there's a miscommunication potentially about what somebody's saying they want and what they really meant, and how do you structure that? How do you make sure, as an owner, and maybe you don't have those in-house resources, how do you make sure that you have a good RFP and that you're not over-designing, but yet you're balancing that with, giving the people that are proposing enough information to respond in a manner that you're still protected down the road? Like, that's kind of a tricky balance. So how do you do that? And I guess maybe I'll start with Jim real quick.
Yeah, I'll start, and I bet some others got things to say here too. I would say first and foremost, hire a good firm to put the RFP together. Hire an experienced design build RFP writer, or start with a good template, but get somebody that can listen to your issues, write them into the contract, and then secondly, send out a draft of the RFP before you issue it to the industry, before you issue it to the shortlisters. You'll get a lot of valuable feedback, in an informal sort of way, where all you need to do is give them a couple weeks to review it, give you their feedback, and you'll get much better project in the end.
I was just going to echo what Jim said. I've received from several different owners before copies of their RFPs to just go over and I guess maybe they look at some contractors having a knack for poking holes in some of the proposals and looking for ways to take advantage of it. And some, I've provided some feedback on those on multiple occasions. I think an important aspect to that is to look for someone potentially that you have worked with in the past that might not be in that marketplace right now. That's probably pretty difficult to do here. But you could certainly ask for references from your local contractors on who they could solicit for feedback.
And just to augment Jim and Tim a little bit, when you send out a draft, when you're circulating your thoughts and ideas within the industry, one of the things you have to do as an owner is you have to maintain sort of the integrity of the communication and the confidentiality of the communication. If an owner suggests to you that they're going to share your idea with the other contractors, with the other designers, you're going to be a lot more reticent to provide them with really good ideas before you write a proposal. If you have a strong reputation for confidentiality and you'll uphold that, then you'll get some really outstanding ideas from your industry, out of your community. But you've got to hold those ideas in confidence. It's really an absolute requirement.
And from the ownership side, don't send out a crappy RFP. I mean, it sounds basic, but I know sometimes we get money, and I've seen this on our public works side, and we're so excited to do the project that we fail to plan the project. We'll send it out with holes in it. We'll send it out with not having those conversations, internal conversations, about really what we're trying to accomplish from all the different parties. And we're just so excited to get out there and get the process going that we send out an early RFP. So on the fire station, I spent hours meeting with the firefighters, with the people that are actually going to be using the station. What do you want? What are you looking for? What do you not like about your stations? What are we trying to accomplish here? Why do we need that? Do we need it this tall or do we need it this tall? How big are your... We look through all of that stuff ahead of time, and I'm telling you, it saved us time on the back end. You feel like you're kind of spending a lot of time up front preparing those RFPs. It's worth it when you get those proposals that actually cover those things that are required and necessary within your project.
That's perfect. And you just reminded me of something, actually, because we've had past discussions. I believe you guys work with an attorney, Robin. I've actually met Robin. She's wonderful. Can you tell me why? I mean, the city of Richland certainly has their own attorneys, and you have experience in RFPs. Why did you engage Robin? What value did she bring?
So first of all, she's an expert, obviously, in design build. Our attorney didn't feel extremely comfortable with it. And so we brought Robin in for that reason. We also brought her in to make sure that we asked all the right questions and that we did it according to the law, the procurement laws that we have to follow down in Washington. And then we used Robin as well because when we scored the RFPs, there was somebody that brought up some questions about a fair scoring and selecting based on a fair evaluation of the RFPs and not getting out of line and judging on things that aren't in the RFP. And that is a real concern from an ownership side. When you put a panel of 5 people together, and of those 5, they may have worked with these contractors before, and they got a buddy that works for that engineering firm, and that guy took them fishing before. There's a lot of bias going on around that table, and I recognize that on our team. We're a small enough community that we know these people. I mean, our kids go to school together with a lot of these contractors. And so we brought Robin in as a check. So she sat and was kind of the mediator in our group and made sure that we stuck to the RFP and the proper scoring system. And in the 2 projects that we've done, yeah, I mean, people aren't happy when they don't get the project, but everyone can at least say that they were treated and evaluated fairly. And they came back afterwards, and I was happy to sit down with them, show them exactly in their proposal where they may have missed and why they didn't get selected. But we brought in that independent third party to really consult with us and make sure that we dotted our I's and crossed our T's.
I think that's a really good point because one of the questions brought up integrity, and that can't be emphasized enough. It has to be integrated in the process throughout, whether it's making sure that you're holding information that's confidential, keep it confidential, and that you have transparency. I mean, we always say, there's some misconceptions out there that, design build's just a way for people to pick and choose their contractor. Maybe some people abuse it that way, but really, as a public entity, you're supposed to be looking out for the taxpayer's best interest. And what's in the taxpayer's best interest is to have a fair and transparent process. And I can say, I'm going to speak for myself on this, and I have no doubt you guys have been on review panels as well. If there is any ounce of potential conflict and I'm helping an owner, you got to tell them right away and say, hey, look, I mean, everybody in this room knows I adore Tracy, and we're like connected at the hip. So is it fair for me to be reviewing a proposal that Tracy's company is on? No, you just don't do that, right? When you have those potential conflicts of interest, you don't want your opinions to be swaying. And so I even say that as an owner. If you find yourself like, hey, I really had a bad experience with this contractor, recognize your own self being maybe unfairly I guess, critical, you know, and find a way to engage some transparency there so that it is a fair process. You have a commitment to everybody involved to do that. So.
One of the ways I think you have a scoring system and you have an algorithm of quality and price and how they can construct it to price, but you have to require your reviewers to put notes on their grades for people. If you give somebody a 91, you've got to have a reason why you put a 91 down for that team and you put a 95 down for somebody else, and you've got to have a form that will let them make notes. And then you've got to be able to go back to the people that didn't win and tell them, here was the weakness that we saw here, and that's what cost you the points. Likewise, you need to go back to the people you selected and you say, here are the weaknesses we saw on your team. Okay, these are the things we think you ought to concentrate a little bit on as you execute the job. And it gives you a solid basis, and it's open and reviewable.
That's excellent. Thank you. So we're going to shift gears to the safety question. I thought that was a great point to bring up. So Tim, I'll ask this to you. I mean, do you think that in design build, or I guess maybe I'll back up, in design bid build, when you're on a project and things aren't safe, I mean, is it the owner that's enforcing your safety, or what's your perspective?
Well, the process of design, build, and selecting your contractor affords you the opportunity to review their safety history. And you can even make that part of the scoring criteria where they're thrown out if their EMR is over 1, which would be the industry standard. And the company I currently work for, we have a very low EMR, and that qualifies us to bid DoD projects and other highly technical projects with sensitive material. So I don't understand how a low bid process would afford you any ability to control the safety on the project, where you have almost unlimited control through the alternative process. You can even put in there a demand for them to provide a safety and health officer for the project, and you can also team up one of your people with them to produce standards and policies specific to the project. And on most of the alternative bid projects I've been part of, well, in fact, all of them, we've had to turn over a site-specific safety plan, and we oftentimes negotiated for, we'll call it bonuses at the project if we could achieve certain safety standards for the project.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the incentives. I have seen that on some contracts down south where you can actually, what's cool in these alternative methods is you can incentivize people. Like, hey, if you're accident free for so many months, you know, here's your bonus. It's kind of cool.
The experiences that I've had relative to safety has a lot to do with incentives. I've done a number of facilities for Intel, and they are extremely safety conscious. As a contractor, if you have a safety violation, some kind of an issue, Intel will tell you to send the person home, okay? And you do that. If you don't have that, then you have incentives and you get an award back from the client, from Intel, for doing that. I was at Ocotillo down in Arizona. We were converting an 8-inch wafer fab to 12-inch tools, and Intel's very big on walking downstairs or walking upstairs and holding onto a handrail with one hand. I was carrying something in both hands. I was gone in a half hour, okay? I mean, they're very serious about it, and that carries over. And people who do that kind of work, especially when you're dealing with exotic gases and chemicals, which we don't do much in sort of the civil side of things, I mean, you become very aware of what your requirements are, and everybody on the site is responsible for everybody else's safety. If you see an unsafe practice, you're supposed to notify your immediate supervisor. They go notify their supervisor. And it's just something you build in. And I think design build, by and large, is a safer work practice than bid build is, because it's not driven by low cost and trying to squeeze every dime out of it. You've got a fixed price, and you want to take all your people home every night.
Darren, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, we write that into our RFP, so kind of confirming what they have to say. And then, again, based on the teamwork and collaboration, our safety department are in the meetings. We have specific meetings where I sit down and say, okay, today we're discussing safety. And we have subcontractors, we have engineers, we have architects, we have our safety people, all sitting around a table, and we're talking about and identifying areas in the project that we think could have potential safety problems, and we're coming up with solutions. So it is definitely part of the conversation, and not just a conversation of they get to the site again and I meet the subcontractor and now here we go, but we're all sitting around a table actively discussing with our staff and with the contractor how we can keep the project safe. So I think it's a much, much safer approach to building than actually design, bid, build.
Yeah, something else to note there is especially the subcontractors. I mean, there's a lot of technical subs out there, right? And I'm going to go ahead since they're here and I'm going to pick on Global Diving a little bit. Sorry, Billy. But Global Diving, you know, talking to them earlier in this conference and stuff, I'm just going to be really candid here. It seems almost absurd to me, especially with diving, to not ask a diver how they should do the work, right? Like, why would it cross someone's mind that they could actually tell a diver, this is how you should do your work? That is a very technical sort of activity, and there are some real risks involved with it, right? When you're actually welding underwater and you're doing some of these things, it's really important to get that feedback early in the process. So if there are ways that you can make something safer by engaging them early in the process, that's advantageous. So I do think that it kind of plays into the design element when you can bring on, and that's the same with electrical and some other technical subs. The sooner they're involved in the process, potentially the design's being shaped a little bit to help accommodate things that are safer. So I know I'm supposed to not talk and just be the mediator, but I wanted to mention that because it is really relevant. So planning process, that was one of the questions that got asked, and the decision element of that and preventing litigation. So when you're planning, and Mark, you've been involved a lot in the planning processes, and I know you were a regional planner for some counties in Washington State. And how do you fit design, build, and delivery into the planning process? At what point does that come into play?
Getting fired up from both sides here. As you look at projects, whether it's in the Columbia River Basin or in Skagit County, where you're dealing with levees and trying to prevent floods and that sort of thing, it's advantageous. I don't say it's mandatory, but it's certainly advantageous to lay out a concept of what you want to do in terms of flood protection or additional agricultural lands or whatever it is, building new floats out there. To bring in maybe 2 or 3 contractors that you're familiar with or that want to work in your community and ask them, okay, how they would see approaching this job. And you'll get diverse opinions. I mean, there will be people who will say, you've got to do it this way because that's what I specialize in, and other people will say, well, here's what I've seen done in other places. I tend to listen a lot more to the people who say, this is what I've seen in other places than this is how I do this kind of work. So I think there's a lot of advantage to gain from mining the industry and mining the knowledge the industry has. I mean, as owner-operators of harbors and ports and that sort of thing, you guys do a great job of taking care of your customers, getting people in and out, making sure things are safe and that sort of thing. But you're probably really not that familiar with how you go about constructing something. And take advantage. I mean, people in the industry, both the engineering side as well as the construction side, are more than willing to come in and talk to you. Pick up the phone, give somebody a call, set up a meeting, and follow through on that.
Absolutely. And Jim, I'm going to go ahead and ask you kind of a similar question, because I know on some of the design build projects that we worked together on in Oregon, there was actually an element of engaging the community in that design build process. And so it was kind of, I think, unique in some regard that you could hire a design builder to help you with the planning and the communication side with the actual stakeholders that are there as well.
Yeah, it can be done. I would, I'm thinking of a job I'm currently on, but basically I would say that upfront planning stuff of understanding who wants what really should be done before the RFP is put out. That should be part of the baseline work. It's okay to identify parties that you've talked to that you want to involve in the solutions, but write that into the RFP then. Don't have a blank slate that surprises come up later. Identify all the key parties and as much as you can put some boundaries on it for the design builder to then address directly, because otherwise you're going to have built-in risks into a lump sum type price.
I'm currently pursuing a progressive design build now, and that is part of the RFP. Is they've identified several aspects of the project and how that's going to impact some local industry and the largest tourist attraction in eastern Washington, as well as their everyday affairs as far as traffic in and out of downtown and to the Central Park area of Spokane. And so that's part of the process. So they didn't have solutions, so that is part of the RFP, is to provide your management solutions and how you're going to address these issues and what the results you expect to get out of it.
Kind of goes back to that professional service sort of comment, right? You're not just hiring someone to build something, you're hiring them to manage that entire element of things.
And that's a big part of when they put the proposal out, they already know how much money they have. So they're saying you're going to fit the project under this budget, and what they want to know is how you're going to address these problems that they see as existing problems that they couldn't quite come up with a good solution for.
Yeah, we do the same. We list how much money we have in the budget, and we go all in. We say we have an all-in budget of X amount of dollars. And then what that does, from at least from my perspective, from the owner's perspective, is that I don't want to say I eliminate the cost as part of the equation when I make the selection, because we do have a component of cost within, but the majority of it is, yes, we can meet that budget and the performance criteria that you've laid out. And then what you get are real solutions to the problems that you have. So then you can focus the majority of your time when you're listening to the presentations by these design builders on what is your solution to my problem. Okay, money's at, we got it. We know that we're spending on City Hall $18.5 million. That's it. There's no more. So at that point, we don't need to discuss that. But how do you solve the problems that I have to meet this set of performance criteria that I did well ahead of time and identified the problems, but now I need to bring in a team to solve those problems. And that's really the advantage of design build in my mind, is that you get more than just money solutions, you get problem solutions. You get a team of professionals that knows how to solve those problems, and then you make your selection based on that.
Absolutely. I'm going to talk really quickly about schedule. So Tim, why in design build or CMGC, why is there this big thing that we saw a slide today that said it's 33% faster. How can that be?
Well, the design doesn't need to be complete before we can start. We've identified, typically permitting, we jump on as soon as we get award. So I think that's the major goal there. And the other problem is, or other aspect of that is, you don't have the delays that you typically run into on most projects. There's at some point there's going to be a problem, and that's going to cause time. And most contracts, especially with government money, dictates that you can't proceed with the work in a change order until the change order is executed. If you have to involve the surety and other aspects to get that change order executed, it could take a couple of months, and that could push you into or out of fish windows or other seasons where you're allowed to perform certain aspects of the project.
And could you pass the mic to Jim for me? So Jim, similar question to you, because how do you, as an engineer, how do you go ahead and let a contractor start buying piles before you even know what's going up above?
Yeah, that makes a lot of designers nervous when you hear the equipment firing up and you haven't stamped the plans yet. But it can be done. If you got to integrate your schedules. You got to sequence, understand what the construction sequence is, and stage the design to meet it. On the projects we were doing in Oregon, Amanda, we were hitting the ground within 45 days of contract. So we were doing design enough to get construction started within 45 calendar days, and we did it 2 projects in a row. So it can be done. Now, I will say if you try and compress it too much, there are risks. One thing we now at Kiewit do is on mega projects, if you get behind, it's just a snowball. And so we try and make sure there's enough time and space between design and construction that you can take care of those last minute optimizations, because they're really going to improve the impacts on the community and reduce costs and refine the solution. So schedule matters big time.
So shovel ready, we talked about this in the presentation earlier about how could design build be shovel ready. So the sense of, all right, you get funding and you hit the ground running. You kind of just hit on it. You are hitting the ground running. So would you consider design build a means for a shovel ready project?
It's definitely a tool. It's going to be a lot more effective if you've got a framework for what you want. If you can, you could just hire a team and say, go start designing something and building it. But if you've got a problem statement and all the community stakeholders identified and some boundaries set on it, then we can really attack the problem and hit the ground running in that mode.
Perfect.
So from our side, funding is interesting because most of the time we get funded for our projects through the bond process. And west side or the east side of the state of Washington is extremely conservative, and the city council does not want to go ask the public for funding. And especially when previous projects that were done design bid build, we had a library that came in, it was $3 million over budget and almost a year late. So you can imagine how the public was feeling about passing another bond for construction projects. So in reality, I've used design build for ours to gain some clout, to show that in the municipal world, in this world that we're in, we can do a project on time and under budget. And it's bought some clout. In fact, the National Laboratory there in Richland came down to us after hearing the success that we had on our fire station, and they said, you know what, we like what you guys are doing there. We saw the price, it was amazing. We saw how quick you guys got it done. Our insurance is telling us that we need a fire station closer to our facility. Can we replicate what you guys did closer to our facility if we pay for your facility? Yeah, we can definitely do that. So now, because we were successful in a previous design build project, the National Laboratory came down to us and is going to fund a new fire station for us a little bit closer to their facility to get rid of one of our old dilapidated fire stations. And it was because we're building off the success that design build afforded us. And the city council, based on that, had a lot more confidence when they went out and sold the public on a new city hall. They felt a lot more confident that, you know what, my staff, my people, and this delivery method done right will actually keep me out of the papers of having to hear that I was $3 million off and a year late. So it doesn't directly give us funding, but it has bought us a lot of clout to where our officials now have confidence to go out and actually try to secure more funding, knowing that they'll get what we say we're going to give them.
Perfect. So we have about 25 minutes left of time that we've been allotted. So I think at this point, I'd like to go ahead and turn it back over to you guys. I mean, are there questions that we haven't asked? I mean, feel free to direct a question at one of these individuals specifically, or, yeah, Matt.
How does the design build work in a situation where you're trying to get a grant and he wants all the information he could possibly get beforehand? And another two-part question is that how does the permitting of us being around wetlands a lot or over the water, how does that come into play when you don't know what's under that water, under that dirt there?
That's a really good point. We haven't talked about permitting yet, and it's actually a big deal. But before we go to the permitting question, I'm just going to go ahead and ask Mike. I mean, Mike, we worked together on this CTF project and called you before we turned in that application and said, what do you think of design build? So
I don't necessarily want all this information. I want to know enough. I want you to know enough. I want you to know what you're trying to accomplish and that you've covered yourself in terms of your costs. Basically, whatever you ask for is the maximum that you're ever going to get from DOT subject to funding. So really the answer is really the information you're getting from these guys in terms of potential design build alternative procurement.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I think we turned in 2 conceptual drawings. I mean, we didn't have a full set of plans that we turned in. He just needed to see that there was going to be this float and kind of where it was going to go. It wasn't a full design, and honestly, I mean, I had some folks help, draw up some things in CAD and make it look professional, so it wasn't just hand sketch drawings. But I mean, they weren't stamped by a PE, not a PE, and I didn't hire a PE to do that. So you can get by as long as you give them enough information and that you have a solid schedule and that you've shown you've put some effort into the budgeting process. I think that's also an element. Did you guys want to add anything on those applications?
I think the other part of Matt's question, though, related to some of the permitting issues and the timing on permitting and what Mike might be able to accept in terms of a grant application may not be what somebody back in Washington, D.C., who's looking at whales and seals and sea lions and that sort of thing is going to need in terms of definition. I think one of the things that you have to do as an owner is you have to take responsibility for securing the permits before you put out an RFQ, or certainly before you put out an RFP. You've got to have the permits well in hand. Otherwise, your design team and your contractor really don't know what they're going to get to build. You get the permit, okay, and you get started. Your design team, Jim, comes up with a great idea. Okay, you've then got to go back to the permitting agency and let them know as soon as you know you're going to make a change how you're going to do that work. I mean, up in Juneau when we were doing that work, we originally anticipated that we would drive the piles initially and then drill them. Turns out we just didn't have enough loose cobble in there to be able to stand those piles up. We wound up having to go back and drill. Talking to the agencies about that slowed us down a little bit because anytime you make a change from what's a permit condition, you're going to have to go back and explain how that's going to impact the thing that they're concerned about, whether it's fish or whales or water quality or whatever else it is. So have the permits in hand before you get out ahead of your wheels on issuing an RFP.
Maybe Jim, because I've seen some others.
Yeah, I'll say some of the biggest risks in design build, and it relates to how you price it, how you get to that lump sum price. Biggest risks are utilities, right-of-way, and permits. So as much as you can define them beforehand, the better. I was just at a design build conference yesterday in Washington, and they talked about permitting process, and they're doing 10 to 20 design build jobs a year, and so they're trying to maintain the rapport with the permitting agencies, and their practice, which is very solid, is to go out and permit in a create an impact zone for wetlands. So, go ahead, delineate the wetlands, determine what the impacts are going to be in a fairly conservative way, and then incentivize the design builder to minimize those impacts. And that's an easy sell to the permitting agencies.
You also asked about when you don't know what's under this new area that you want to explore. And that goes right back to shifting risk to the person most capable of handling the risk. So the contractor, he can look at historical geotechnical reports, but then if there is a problem, he's probably tooled up or he's mobilized adequately to be tooled up to handle the changes that may be apparent in that location. So it always boils down to the golden rule of assigning risk to those best capable of dealing with it.
We said earlier today that it's always good to get multiple perspectives, right? Because every project is truly unique. And I would say most of the time, I would agree with what Mark said there. But I have also seen successfully projects done where the permitting process is put on the design builder. That is not always the right answer, but it can work. We successfully did that in Oregon very well. Actually, we had a on-staff permitting person that helped us. Gary Paxton, that project that was that was put on the design builder. It was not put on the design builder in Kodiak. So it's really a mix, and it's kind of about assessing timing and how much information you need to show them in advance to get the permits, and then going back and changing it. But Mark mentioned something that was interesting to me. He said, if you get the permits and then the design builder changes it, you have to go back to the permitting agency and explain this. I agree, and that can be a problem. But if you allow the design builder to help lead that process, which was what worked, I think, well for us in Oregon, is that those conditions and what you're agreeing to with the permitting agencies, they're right, meaning they're what the contractor's going to do right off the bat. There isn't going back and changing it because you're asking the contractor as you're writing the permit conditions. And when you have the agencies come back and say, here's our draft permit conditions, what do you think? And you got the contractor at the table and you hand it to him and he says, yeah, that'll work, or no, we got to change this, this, and this. It's sort of letting that process be integrated.
I'll just clarify your emphasis on the Oregon example, because there was a way we got through that is because Oregon had established programmatic permit conditions, and so we knew what the rules were, we knew what the boundaries were, and if in-water work was the big issue, then we worked to minimize that. We knew exactly what the impacts were. If we increased the in-water work and had to mitigate it, then we knew that too. We could calculate the values ourselves. That was a very special situation. So generally, permits scare the heck out of us.
This is sort of new to me, the alternative bid process. So my first question is kind of what you were just talking about in terms of changes, the risks on a project. As an owner, how do I know that how are the changes accounted for between vendor, supplier, sub, contractor, designer, such that everybody gets their fair share, their profits stay so that they're continuing to be viable? I'm a little bit unsure about how that exactly works and how that risk is being shared such that you can get a fair profit and Tim can actually do what he says he can do because he thinks he's all spun up and ready to go, but then he finds out that he's doing his rock sockets through engine parts in the harbor because he never anticipated that.
So I think that the answer, unfortunately, is rather simplistic to a somewhat more complex situation that may occur, but only certain contractors will pursue design, build, or alternative contracting to take on that risk. And that basically eliminates the guys that aren't aware of what could potentially be out there. When it is something as detrimental as geotechnical can be, since foundations tend to be the most expensive portions of the project, they also tend to be the highest in risk. I think it's advantageous for the owner to maybe have some clause in their contracting about the level of risk that a contractor will have to absorb, and that's in an effort to minimize the costs to the project up front. In other words, if I have to take all the risk for all of the unknowns, obviously the price can be slightly inflated to take on that risk.
So for us, we carry a fairly large contingency up front because of geo, because of the unknown conditions. And we carry that together as a project team. And what we do is we establish a list of things that, hey, if we don't run into any problems, these are some of the things that we're going to spend that contingency on. And so after we get through a lot of the foundation work, so we'll get up out of the ground, and then everyone goes, okay, now we can go. We sit down as a team, and we talk about the contingency money that's sitting there, and we say, okay, let's take out our list. We wanted X, Y, and Z in the project. What can we afford with this contingency that we didn't use on the geo work? We also have an off-ramp that we've built into our contracts with the contractor. So, design build isn't shifting all risk to the design builder. And I want to make sure that that's clear. As an owner, you still carry risk. We're just assigned the risk that we're the most equipped to handle. And when you go down in the ground, and if there's some conditions under there that are prohibitive, that put it out of the scope, that now I won't get the project that I wanted to deliver, I can't shift that risk onto the builder. I just can't. So the project pays for it. So I have enough money in the project to pay for that without damaging the builder.
What's an off-ramp?
So an off-ramp is if we go down and we get down there and we go, oh no, we have a major problem. There's an off-ramp clause in the contract that we can part ways, that we can both get out of it. Both of us are injured, or we can stop the project and figure out what the next move is if it's that catastrophic. And we actually have off-ramps at various times in our contract. So we get through the validation period, we validate that our scope and budget work, and we look at everybody and we go, okay, are we good? And we sign a validation agreement and we move to the next phase of design. And then we have one after geo work, and if we're happy with that, then we keep moving.
Mark and Darren, can you talk a little bit about thresholds for unsuccessful solicitations during the bidding process?
What will happen is sometimes we will have a concept that will be developed by an engineer or an architect, and they will do a tentative cost estimate. And oftentimes, people who are designing something tend to be optimistic. They want to see what they're designing. They want to see it built. And maybe they don't think about all the contingencies. They don't think about subsurface conditions. They don't think about weather or seasonality affecting it. They don't think about in-water work and seasonality affecting that. So of consequence, they think, well, we're going to do this for $3 million. Goes out to people who are actually knowledgeable about how you actually build something, okay? And the contractors come back as a group and they say, no, we're really looking at $7 million here. You know, and we've all been involved. I've pursued projects that, you know, you took a look at it and you took a look at it. The 805 project down in San Diego, and Caltrans had an extremely unrealistically low cost for that. We took that and said, we're not even going to submit a proposal because we know we can't even begin to approach their number. And eventually nobody submitted on it. So, I mean, that's how that happens. We've all been involved in projects that have stipends. As the designers, and C.H. Swim Hill did a lot of design work, you know, you would have a stipend that you knew was $30,000 or $100,000 or whatever it was. And you would provide the design, the contractor would price the thing, and if you weren't selected, then the owner would come back and they would write a check to the team, okay, and you maybe have a contractual arrangement about how it got divided because the contractor is putting in a lot of time and effort on the cost estimate, the designer is doing their pencil work and putting that sort of thing together. And that's not at all uncommon, especially on somewhat larger scale projects, is really when you see stipends occur.
So one of the things that we do to eliminate that, because when we started in the design build world, that was one of the things that we heard loud and clear, is that architects, engineers, builders were going, listen, it's brutal when you come in on a traditional design build and make us come in with these huge designs for you on a hope that we're one of 3 that get selected. So on the fire station, we didn't require any drawings. We didn't require any drawings at all. We did a real, and that's part of the draw for me of qualifications based, is that we selected based on qualifications on past work experience. I had 3 people there that had already built fire stations in the past. I didn't need them to tell me that they could build a fire station or show me through plans that they could build a fire station. I knew that they could. I knew that they could do it. What I wanted was the right team that could sit down at a table with us and design our fire station that we all worked on together. And so we limited a lot of our stipend because of that, and it made the proposal much, much easier for the contractors to come in on, and they really appreciate it. We did the same thing on City Hall, $18.5 million, 0 design. I didn't want any design work at all. What I wanted was for them to come in and say, we can meet these minimum programs, we'll sit at a table and start to design. When we get up to about 30% design, there's a cost to that. We can off-ramp if we don't think that the project's a go, if we don't think we can do it, and then we'll go on from there. But I'm a huge proponent of limited design. When you have shortlisted down to 3, all 3 of those can do it. It's not a question of can they do the work. It's a question of what is the right team for this project, for my staff, for what I'm trying to accomplish right now. So
Stipends, I would just want to say the industry practice is only paying a small portion of what it's costing. What it's costing to put those together, but the normally the value in paying that stipend is that you as the owner get those competitors' plans for your use too. You can incorporate the non-winning proposer's solutions into the winning proposer's solutions if you choose. If you agree to pay that stipend, you get the rights to those.
What Darren is talking about a lot, which is spot on, is a fabulous mechanism through progressive design build where you can do absolutely no plans at all in your proposals. The other thing we've talked a little bit about is if you want to have competitive design solutions, and you can do that and encourage and write an RFP in a manner that doesn't require them to, they can show you their design solution, but in just a couple sheets, so that they're not engineering this gigantuous proposal, because that isn't fair to anybody involved, and you're gonna turn the industry off of wanting to do design build if they're having to do a bunch of work for free. That's not a good business practice. Okay, well, I really want to thank all of you for being a part of this panel. I know you've taken time out of your daily jobs and tasks, and you're all very busy, so thank you so much for making the trip, and thank you guys for making this a successful day and for sticking with us this long. So thank you.